Hit it, hit it.
Hi, and welcome to the Marley Bird YouTube channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to wet block and steam block your acrylics. Specifically, we're going to work on the blocks for the Crochet Stitch Sampler Baby Blanket, which was a crochet along sponsored by Red Heart. You can find the pattern for the Crochet Stitch Sampler Baby Blanket over at marleybird.com, and then there's a plethora of videos to walk you through each step of making those squares. Now, part of this crochet along was that I had a Facebook group dedicated just to the crochet along, and there were thousands of people from around the world who joined in, and many of them had questions about blocking their squares because I suggested that you blocked your squares to size depending on what size gauge you wanted. Okay, so for my sample blanket, I had squares that were 11 inches by 11 inches, and I gave the chain amounts, the starting chain amounts, to make your squares the same size as mine. It was your job then to adjust your hook size to get the same size as mine, or to create squares that were the size you wanted them to be. As long as they were all the same size, that's all that mattered. So as we were going along this crochet along, I decided that it was really important that I did a video on how to wet block and steam block your squares because there was so many questions about it, okay? So in order to accommodate the masses and make sure everybody knows how to wet block and steam block appropriately, I am doing this video. The first part of the video is going to be how to wet block, and I'm going to show you an example of something that has been wet blocked and what it looks like after the fact. And then the second part of the video will be steam blocking. And I'll show you how to steam block using this really nifty tool. It's a steam blocker. I actually do not use a iron to steam block my stuff because I just feel like there are too many chances for an accidental mistake to drop the iron on it. So I prefer to use a specific steam blocker. So I'm going to show you how to use these tools and what it takes to steam block your squares. And you can use this information to steam block or wet block anything. So it doesn't just have to be for these squares. So this video is really going to benefit all of you out there, even if you didn't make the Crochet Stitch Sampler Baby Blanket. Honestly, this is just really good general information to use for your acrylics to really make them look like they are top-notch and well-made and not the bless your heart you made that piece, right? Okay, y'all know what I mean. So go ahead, get your squares, join me over here, and I'm going to show you how to wet block first. Here we go. So you're ready to wet block. The first thing you're going to need is to get a bowl full of water. Lukewarm water, room temperature water is really what you need. You don't need it really hot, you don't need it really cold, just lukewarm is perfectly fine. You can do this in a sink as well, but because I'm showing you here in my studio, I have a nice little plastic basin of water, and I'm getting ready to put a capful of soap into it. Now, I know that it's possible to use shampoo soap or a wool light or a liquid detergent when you're dealing with acrylic yarn. Absolutely fine. I'm actually using a wool wash today for mine just because I think it smells really good. So what I've done here, go ahead and take a look down here. I have put my soap in the water and I'm just swishing it around right now just to mix the soap in. Now the soap I'm using is a no rinse soap, so I don't have to worry about getting any of the suds or anything out. It's no rinse, meaning I don't have to do anything once I do my swatch. Once I have all of the soap and water in there and it's ready, I'm going to grab a swatch. And right here, this is just a generic swatch made out of Red Heart Unforgettable yarn, and it was just double crochets. And I'm going to stick it in here. I actually use this swatch for the gauge video right here on the channel. You can see I'm squeezing the swatch. Now I can do this with acrylic. I can agitate it a little bit because I don't have to worry about felting, right? There's nothing that in it to felt. There's no wool, and there's not even a superwash wool. It's just 100% acrylic. What I'm doing right now essentially is I'm getting the soap and the water thoroughly, how about this? I'm getting the swatch thoroughly saturated with the soap and the water. Once I feel like it's pretty good, I'm just going to grab all of it and I'm pulling it out of the basin here and I'm squeezing it, trying to get as much of the excess water out as possible. You see that? Once I do that, I go ahead and I grab a towel, and for me, what I like to do is I will lay the piece out on the towel. Just, you know, just generic like whatever. And then I roll it up just to get any extra water out. Now, I know I have friends who, when they're working with bigger pieces, they'll lay their stuff on the towel, and to get as much water out as possible, they'll actually put this on the ground and step on it to get water out. You can do that if you want, but I don't feel like we need to do that with this particular square, right? Once I get as much water out as I feel like it feels pretty good now, it's just normal, I can move my towel. And I have a nice grid right here. Now what I'm using a Quilters Cut and Press. On one side it has a really solid surface that I could cut, and on the other side it has a nice mesh, not mesh, like compressible surface. How about that? I don't know. Surface I can pin into. If I lay this down, I have this nice grid here that I can use little T-pins or quilters pins to start pinning it into place. Now, the first thing I'm going to mention is if you are selecting a pin, it's important you get one that is rust-free, okay? Because you're getting ready to add this to your project that is saturated, right? It's full of water. So you want to make sure that this pin is rust-free. Mine are, so I'm just going to grab the corner here of my little swatch and I'm pinning it to my grid. Now, because this little swatch doesn't have to be a particular size, I'm not worrying about how far out I am pinning it as far as measurement. I'm just going to pin it to where it looks like I want the stitches to be. Meaning if I wanted the stitches to be super stretched out like that, right, I could pin it out that far. But because I really don't want them to be, I want them to be kind of relaxed and nice and neat. I just want them to be comfortable and clean. I'm just kind of petting out my swatch, making it as even as I want it to be, and then pinning it to a grid just to keep my place set, right? Now, doing this, what I'm doing is I am telling this fiber that I want it to be this particular size as it dries, okay? The problem with this is that acrylic does not have any memory. So even though I am pinning this out to be this size, once I unpin it when it's all dry, that doesn't mean it's going to stay that size, okay? So I would continue pinning all around. You notice I pinned the corners first, and then I started pinning around the sides like that, right? So as this dries and I go to unpin it, it will still go back to being the same size. So if I had stretched it out, it would shrink in. It just doesn't have any memory like wool does. I'm going to show you an example of that. Okay, so I'm going to pull in some that have already been wet blocked. Now these two squares, they are lovely squares that I had made for a blanket in my brand new book, Cold Weather Crochet. And after these squares were made, the crocheter actually did wet block them. So she submerged them in water and wet blocked them. And so when they wet blocked, she made sure that she pinned them all out so they were all the same size. So that way it was easy for her to seam them up. And I actually have the blanket right here. I'm going to go off film real quick. I should have brought it over, but I didn't think about it. So here's the blanket right here. And you can see once it's all complete and she seamed everything up really beautifully, everything stayed nice and square. We didn't have to do anything else to it, right? But as the blocks were independent of themselves that didn't get seamed, they start to curl in on themselves. Look at that. You see that? See how they start to curl in? Not that it's a bad thing. If I were to wet block this again, it could lay down flat. But that's just kind of something that happens naturally when you wet block acrylic, because acrylic doesn't have memory. Because it doesn't have memory, you can make this, so if we move this out of the way, if I wanted to take this square, sorry, I know that I'm in camera and frame, and I wanted to maybe overstretch it. So I wanted to take these, and instead of just letting this naturally be that wide, maybe I tried to stretch it out and make it like super wide, okay? I tried to make it wider than it really should be. I tried to make it like this, okay? When I do this, I am not actually going to get this size of a square when all is said and done, because yeah, it looks like it's all stretched out and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 inches wide, you know, however many inches long. It looks really great. And if I were to wet block this and put it to this measurement, I would think, okay, this is great, I'm going to get it to this size. The problem is once it's dry, it doesn't have the memory to stay to that size. So it will automatically go back with the elasticity of the acrylic and shrink back to the way it was. Okay, so that's wet blocking acrylic. Some of you might ask, why would I ever do wet blocking then? Well, you absolutely can do wet blocking, and it's something that it's important. As I mentioned with this particular blanket, we did wet block it, and once it was all seamed together and stuff, it still looks really beautiful. There is nothing wrong with it at all, and it still makes really nice squares. It's also a great way to block out your wools or your natural fibers. I think that it's just one of those good things to do. But there are other ways that you can create a blocking effect with acrylic, and we're going to talk about steaming your acrylic next. Okay, so we talked about wet blocking, and it's time to discuss steam blocking. Now, as I mentioned in the introduction, I prefer to use a handheld steamer. This is by Rowenta, and it maybe costs $25 at Walmart or something like that. I don't like to use the steam button on an iron because I feel like it's too chancy to accidentally touch the actual base of the iron to your acrylic piece. If you were to do that, you would actually melt the acrylic and you would do what's called killing it. Now, there are times when killing acrylic is appropriate, and when you are going to make something like that, absolutely kill your acrylic. But if you want to use the steam just to soften your acrylic a little bit and to keep it or make your square into a shape that you want it to stay in, steaming is really helpful. Now, I'm going to preface the rest of this section with the fact that Red Heart does not recommend steam blocking their acrylic yarn. They prefer you to wet block or throw it in the washing machine and dryer because it is machine washable. So the rest of these instructions are purely to show you that if you choose to steam block your acrylic, this is how you do it. And the next thing I want to mention is that if you are going to steam block something, make a little swatch or a sample that is not vital to your actual piece and test that with your steamer first to make sure that you're not going to ruin all of that work that you just put in. So, once again, Red Heart does not condone steam blocking their acrylic. They do not recommend it. But if you want to steam block your acrylic yarn, this is how you do it, okay? Here we go. So once again, I have my steamer right here, and I'm still using my same cut and press quilter thing, okay? We're gonna use this for the demonstration. And I'm gonna pull over a nice little skinny swatch here. And you can see here, this is the blooming granny square, which is the centerpiece of the Crochet Stitch Sampler baby blanket. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to pin down this piece to the measurement that I want it to be. So let's say I want it, let's say right there, and oop, did that come out? If I were not to stretch it, I'd put it right there, but I'm gonna stretch it out to make it as even of a square as possible. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 inches by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which means I have to bring this down here. You can see I'm already pulling on this fiber. And I'm gonna take this, come over here, and stretch that. Now you can see I've put my pins in kind of diagonal, and that is just so that way I can get to the acrylic or get to the swatch best I can with my steamer. Now I'm going to go ahead and just mark these ones. I don't have to do a lot of work because the yarn doesn't want to pinch in on me very much, like some lace yarns or lace stitches, I should say, and I will show you those in just a little bit. But for this, I'm going to show you how this looks, okay? We'll go ahead and do the top couple to make sure they're the same size. And this is great. Now, for me, blocking is something that I do for everything. I block everything I complete before I send it into the magazines or the book publishers or the yarn companies. It's just something that I think really makes that finishing touch on your whatever you're making, blanket, garment, cowl, whatever it is. So when I block something, I always will pin it out to the size it wants to be, and you can see it's already starting to open up the little chain one sections of this particular piece. If this were a true lace piece and we were really spreading it open, you'd really begin to see the lacy nature of the crochet stitch. Now all I'm going to do with my little hand steamer is I have a button right here that I'm just going to push it, and it's going to spew steam out these little holes. Now steam is incredibly hot. That's my duh question or duh response for you guys, okay? It's very hot, so make sure you keep your fingers free. Don't put your fingers in there and manipulate the fiber as you're steaming it. You want to make sure you keep your hands clear and just put this close to the fiber. If you're using an iron, you do not want to touch the iron base to your actual fabric. I will repeat that. Do not touch your iron to your fabric. We just want the steam. Okay? So if I'm doing this, you can see as I'm pushing my button, can you see the steam coming up? It's starting to actually steam the piece. So right here, you can see this pot holder that my best friend made me. And she is famous for making single crochet pot holders. She casts on, or she chains a certain amount and then makes it till it's about square, and then makes a second one. So see, there's two here. And then she single crochets them all together. Now, a pot holder does what? It grabs hot pots. So it's right up next to heat. And so what happens is the fiber begins to melt and becomes really super shiny. Can you see that? So no more can you see the nice fibers and the actual strands of yarn. It's all kind of mushed together. It's really, it's killed. You've killed the acrylic here. It's really drapey. I mean, you can see there, it just wants to bend. And when I originally got it, it was nice and flat. It didn't really bend too much. It was really, you know, like a normal piece of crochet. But over time and use, it has killed the acrylic. It's still usable. It was never meant to not be used, and we knew that this would happen, but this is a good example of what happens when you kill acrylic. It becomes nice and shiny, the fibers become compressed down, and it's just something that if you want them to be nice and bulky like this for your crochet baby blanket, this is not what you want to do. So you want to be very careful about over steaming or accidentally touching your acrylics with a hot iron, because this is what can happen. Okay, that's called killing acrylic. Now, if I wanted to, I could go back and I could go over this one more time with my steamer. You don't have to, it's totally up to you, whatever you think it needs. Okay, once it is completely steamed, you have to set it to dry. Okay, you don't want to do anything, you don't want to unpin it until it's all dried and put into place. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch the camera away so that I can bring something in to show you that I've already pinned in place, okay? Okay, so what I have here, as we look down here, is I have a little swatch that I completed out of some acrylic yarn. It's the Holiday yarn by Red Heart. And I made this beautiful motif that I really wanted to open up and be lace-like, right? When I finished it right off the hook, it was kind of crumpled up and didn't look really nice. And so what I did is I pinned it out just like I showed you previously, and I took the steamer right here, and I blocked it. So this is completely dry now, and I'm going to unpin it and let's see what it looks like, okay? So as I go to unpin it, oh my gosh, you can automatically see it's pinching in a little bit, but look, it's not closing up nearly as much as it was when I originally had it straight off the hook. The little lace bits, the open sections, the chain sections are staying open, and you can still see the nice pineapple stitch here. It kind of looks like a snowflake to me. So here we are, it's all complete, and look at that. It stayed the shape. Isn't that cool? So I can still see the actual stitches. I didn't kill my acrylic. Everything is still visible, and I steamed it really nice and neat, and it didn't change the shape in the sense of it's not smaller once it's all done. It's nice and drapey, it feels good, and it's a beautiful fabric, and it'll be much easier for me to work with that. Okay, so that's an example of what it would look like once it's all complete. You can see that as it dried and I unpinned it, it didn't shrink back. Okay, it looks really good. Now I'm going to set this aside, and now I've got to maneuver this so that my little thing here, my cutting board, is into play. What I'm using is one of those cardboard cutting boards that you can see or you can purchase at any usually big box store or Fiber Mart or wherever usually fabric is sold. And so what I've done, let me see if I can widen the shot here a little bit for you guys. What I've done is I've used this cardboard cutting board, and before I put any sort of steam or wet product or anything on it, I took a damp cloth and I wiped it all down just to get any excess print of ink off of it. Okay, so I didn't want that to get onto my fabric, so my squares that I've created. Once I've done that, I went ahead and I started pinning out my squares to the size I wanted them to be. So these squares are for my extra baby blanket that I'm creating, and they are 11 by 11. And what I've done is I just set them down, I pin them out to 11 by 11, and I am getting ready to move on to the next ones. What's important here is I wanted to show you these ones in particular because they are lacy and they kind of go back to the whole idea. You can tell I'm standing up today because I have to go around the table quite a bit. They go back to the idea of this lacy one. I wanted them to be opened up. I wanted them to be nice and beautiful and lace-like, especially the fan trellis, right? Because it's a lacy stitch. So what I've done here with the fan trellis, and let me grab my T-pins. For this one, I'm using nickel-plated T-pins so they will not rust. And again, you can get those in the quilter section of any sort of store. And so I have pinned out the corners to the 11 by 11. And you can see that the fabric is already wanting to squish in, right? Because it doesn't want to be that big. But I want to force it to be that big. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin it out on all sides to be the size I want it to be. And then I'm going to steam block it. And my hunch, my knowledge is that once I steam block this, just as this one stays open, that one's going to be nice and open, and it's going to stay at my 11 by 11. So when I go to seam everything together, it'll be easier. So even though this is pinching in, what I'm going to do is I put my pin into one of my stitches, and I'm grabbing it and pulling it out. And so I'm kind of starting, relatively in the center. So I did the corners, I did that center. Now maybe I'll do this center, so I'll pull this up, because I know that this center trellis is where I want it to be, right? You know what I'm going to do on the trellis is I'm going to grab the single crochets. Yeah, that looks better. And this is one of those things where you would just play along with your own squares, whatever it is you're making, and you would pin it so that it gets you the shape and size that you want your, whether it's a square or a garment or whatever it may be, to get it to be the size you want it to be. So here I'm going to take the bottom sections and I'm working around, right? I'm just working around the whole piece to make sure everything stays where it needs to be. And I'm punching it just right into my cardboard here. Now these big pins, they are big pins. So like they're recommended for upholstery and whatnot on the packaging that I looked at. But I really like them. I like being able to handle them. I actually handle them a lot better than the little yellow ones I was using earlier. They're a lot easier to maneuver. So, but you can do anything you want. There's also things called blocking wires, and that'll be a whole different video when I'll talk about blocking wires. For today, we're just going to use the T-pins and discuss the wet blocking and the steam blocking. So I'm just going, and you can do this as much or as little as you want. I'm using more than I think some people would, but I really want to just have all of my side edges really come out to be what I want them to be, right? And I don't want to have any willy-nilly funny little pointy sections coming out because maybe I pulled too much in one section, but because I didn't pull this section, maybe it's all in there and I get these really points. I don't want that. I don't want the points. I want them to be nice and as straight as possible. And that's actually where our blocking wire would come in handy too. If I was doing a garment or whatnot, I really like using blocking wires. So I do the same thing on this edge. I'm just going along, pulling things out, making it as nice as I can. I can speak. It's so pretty. I love it when it's time to actually block pieces because it means that I'm nearly finished. And blocking before I do any seaming actually makes my seaming so much easier because everything's the same size. All the edges are nice and crisp and clean, and it makes my fabric smell good because I use a really nice fiber wash. And it makes me happy. And so the whole process of knitting and crocheting, right, it's supposed to make you happy. That's why we all do it. And so this part makes me happy. So you can see here, my square, which was all kind of squinched in on itself, is now blocked out. If I were doing this with a wet block, I am not so certain that this would stay the size that I need it to be. But it is my experience that by doing the steam blocking with this, it will come out nice and neat. So that's what I'll do there. And so that's the fan trellis. This one over here is the crosshatch, and it's one of the ones that you guys in the crochet along really asked about as far as how to block it and make the edges nice. So what I've done is, again, you can see it started to pull in on itself, so I started pulling it out just like I did over here to make it what I wanted it to be, right? I want it to be this 11 by 11. And so when I did that, on the edges here where it's this point, if you guys remember watching the crosshatch video, I mentioned that when you seam this together, you can choose to have just the little points attached to each corner, or you can pull this whole edge down and attach it to the corner. It's completely up to you. One of the things we are going to talk about when it comes to seaming is edging all of the squares also. If you choose to do that, that's totally fine. And it's something actually I'm going to show you guys a little sample of. And what I mean by that is once all your squares are blocked like this, going back and taking yarn and single crocheting around the entire edge of the blocks to make them all just single crochet edges, just like the Blooming Granny square, so that it's easier to seam that way. And that's an absolute possibility for you guys as far as finishing. Once my squares are pinned out like this, I can go ahead, once again, take my steamer, and I would just come right up next to it and start to steam it. You can see I have this here. This is an upholstery attachment, and it's like a little brush to it. The reason I added that to mine was just to make it so that I didn't put the steamer directly onto my fabric. The brush kind of gives me a little extra space to make sure I don't touch my fabric. All right, I'm running out of water here, so I'm gonna have to set this aside and then steam some more. So I'm gonna continue steaming, and then I'm gonna show you guys what this looks like when it's not steamed, when it's all done steamed. Okay, it's time to unpin those blocks. If you remember, we steam blocked a couple of squares that are a little bit lacy in nature, and we really stretched them out to be the 11 by 11 that we wanted them to be. Let's see if they stay that way. If you look down here, you can see that we have the fan trellis stitch right here and my crosshatch stitch square right here. We pin them out so that they are 11 by 11, and we steam blocked them, okay? So we're hoping that the steam block will help them stay out as close to 11 by 11 as possible to make it easier for us to seam them up to the two squares that I've already taken off, the bobble and the basket weave. So those are absolutely perfect. They're 11 by 11, and we're ready to go with those ones, but it's time to get these. So let's take a look. They are completely dry, so I don't have to worry about that. And that's when you want to start unpinning everything. Your work has to be completely dry, okay? Once it's completely dry, you go ahead and you start unpinning, and that's when you start to see if everything that you had planned is going to work. So you can see it's cinching in just ever so slightly, but not that much at all. Like it's nothing like it was. It was really in there, like really close in, right? But now if it's all wet or steam blocked, and it looks great. I'm undoing all of those, and you can see my basket weave square and my crosshatch are the same size. Look at that. I'll set those up there, and let's take a look at the fan trellis, okay? So I'm going to start unpinning my fan trellis. I can see that it's coming in ever so slightly here, right? So it could be that if I wanted to pin this out again and do another shot of steam, I could, but I'm actually not concerned about it coming in just a little bit because it's nothing like it was. You remember like it was, don't you? It was really cinching in, horrible. We don't mind if it cinches in a little bit to relax because the weight of the blanket itself is going to let it blossom out a little bit and really let those lace stitches open up, right? So we can see here, look at that. It's ever so slightly coming in from the 11 by 11. It is not that bad at all. And when I match it up to my bobble stitch right there, you can see they match up really great. Okay, so this is where I would go ahead and I would begin to lay out all of my squares so that they would be ready for seaming. Now there is the next video, which is all about seaming this particular blanket together, and I'm going to show you how to seam it up using slip stitch, single crochet, and a mattress stitch. But this is the point in the pattern that I want to point out. If you want to edge your blocks, this is when you want to do it, okay? Look down here and let's see what I mean. So right now, you can see that these blocks, they match up pretty great, right? Because we did all the blocking. But the stitches along the edges are not the same, right? Even along the top edge here of the basket weave, we have our nice V's, which is the top of the stitch. Same thing when we look at both of these up here. But when we start looking at the side edges, they are not the same. Is it possible to seam that up? Absolutely. I actually like to do it that way. I'm not a big fan of bordering around each of my squares. Having said that, I still think they look pretty when they're all bordered. It's totally up to you. So the reason I'm bringing that up right now is if you want to put an edging around all of your squares, and let's talk specifically about the crosshatch square real quick. If you wanted to put a single crochet edging around this entire square, and maybe make it so that you put a single crochet at the point and then a couple chains and then a single crochet at the point so that you have a nice solid edge to build into, this is when you want to do it, after the square has been blocked. The reason you want to do it after it's been blocked is because you will now have a better chance of having your single crochets around the edges even, okay? So when you go to crochet around all of the edges, making sure you do either 3 single crochets in the corner or maybe a single chain 1 single, that's what I actually prefer, in all of the corners to make sure it doesn't cup up on you. This is when you want to do it because you have a better chance of, say you fold this in half, put a couple stitch markers, and then you do an even number of single crochets there, an even number of single crochets from the stitch marker to the end, and then do the same over here. We'll talk more about that when we go into seaming these pieces together, but I just wanted to give you a heads up that right now is when you would want to do that. Okay, so I've given you as much information as I could give you regarding steam blocking and wet blocking acrylic. We did not use blocking wires for this video, but it's because I didn't feel like you needed them for these particular squares. But in future videos, when I talk about blocking out other objects, I will use my blocking wires and show you guys how to use those as well. Hopefully you guys will finish up all your squares and choose whichever blocking method you wish to use, whether it's wet blocking or steam blocking, making sure you do not kill that fabric. And once again, I want to remind you that Red Heart does not recommend steam blocking, but it is out there as an available option for you. Make sure you also choose to test out your steam blocking on a swatch that is not your blanket to make sure that you know what you're doing, okay? So it's best to do it on a swatch that really doesn't matter, don't you think? I think so too. Once you do all that, once you have all of these blocked, we are going to be ready for seaming. You can choose to edge the blocks right now, or you could wait for the seaming video and learn how to do a little bit of edging from that video and then seaming up edges that have a nice clean edge with the single crochet, okay? Hopefully you like this video and you're really enjoying making this blanket. I know that I'm really having a good time teaching you guys how to make this, and all of you in the crochet along group, I am so proud of you. Gosh, all of a sudden I got teary-eyed. I really am so incredibly proud of you, and all of you working so super hard to really make the squares as perfect as possible and perfect for you with your gauge, your hook, your chain amount, and some of you even changed the stitches, and it's just remarkable. It's fun to watch you guys succeed, and I'm so excited that I was here to help you along the way. And this is just one little step, and then we will seam it up, do the border, and you will be done. Make sure you hit subscribe to the Marley Bird YouTube channel so you're up to date whenever there's a video released. And if you like these instructions, please smash that like button, as my kids say right down there, the little thumbs up. Let everybody know that you like today's video.